The city grid is not a Roman invention. This simple, orderly design we see everywhere from New York to Tokyo appeared thousands of years before Rome was even founded. Our common history books often get this story wrong, framing urban progress as a straight line from Greece to Rome and then to us. But the truth is far more fascinating and global. By the end of this journey, you will see the map of human history redrawn, revealing a pattern of genius that emerged shockingly early across separate continents. Why did cultures from the Indus Valley to the highlands of Peru independently master complex urban planning in the Bronze Age, only for this knowledge to fade and be rediscovered millennia later? What were they trying to tell us about power, the cosmos, and our own desire for order? This is the mystery of the urban grids that came too early. How much of our modern world is built on ideas we forgot we already knew? The story of the city grid is often told as a single, triumphant march of progress. It goes like this: the Greeks laid the philosophical groundwork for a rational society. The Romans, those master engineers, then perfected the blueprint, stamping their orderly military camps and colonial towns across an empire. This idea, the Roman ideal, was lost in the Middle Ages only to be gloriously rediscovered during the Renaissance, paving the way for our modern metropolises. It is a clean, satisfying narrative, and it is almost entirely wrong. This version of history did not emerge by accident. It was carefully constructed centuries after the fall of Rome itself. Renaissance thinkers, looking back at the ruins of classical civilization with awe, saw in Roman engineering the pinnacle of human achievement. They were the original classicists, and in their fervor to revive a golden age, they consciously or unconsciously placed Rome at the very center of the story of urbanism. Later historians, trained in this Western classical tradition, simply continued the pattern, writing textbooks that framed Rome not just as an innovator, but as the origin point for rational city design. This created a powerful, persistent myth of Roman primacy. But what happens when we wipe that myth from the map and look with fresh eyes? Suddenly, a different pattern emerges, one not of linear progress but of startling parallel invention. Long before a single stone was laid for the Roman Forum, cities built on precise, right-angled grids were already thriving. In the Indus Valley, around 2,600 years before the Common Era, the great cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were organized with an almost mathematical precision, their streets running north-south and east-west in a flawless grid. Over in the Americas, centuries before European contact, the city of Teotihuacan in Mexico was arranged along a colossal grid aligned with celestial movements. And in what is now Peru, the city of Caral, one of the oldest in the Americas, displayed a sophisticated planned layout over 4,600 years ago. These were not happy accidents or simple villages that grew organically. They were deliberate, large-scale acts of planning that required a shared vision, advanced understanding of geometry, and a powerful central authority to enforce. The realization is profound. The urban grid, that symbol of modern order, is not a European invention that spread across the globe. It is a human idea, one that has sprung up independently in different corners of the world, at different times, whenever a society reached a certain level of complexity and sought to impose its will upon the landscape. This changes everything. It means we are not looking at a single thread of history, but at a tapestry woven with many similar patterns, patterns that appeared far too early for the traditional story to hold. Why would cultures with no possible contact with each other all arrive at the same elegant solution for organizing human life? What does that tell us about the universal challenges of civilization itself? This idea of a grid is deceptively simple. We see a map with straight lines and call it planned. But for ancient societies, a true urban grid was never just about geometry. It was a complete spatial language, a physical manifesto written in streets and stones that communicated power, belief, and social order to everyone who lived within it. To understand why these early grids are so revolutionary, we need to look beyond the lines on a map and see the system they created. The first and most obvious component is the orthogonal street network, streets that meet at perfect right angles. This creates a predictable, repeating pattern, but that pattern alone isn't enough. What transforms it from a simple design into a profound statement is standardization. We see this in the consistent block sizes, the uniform widths of major thoroughfares versus smaller lanes. This regularity didn't happen by chance. It required a shared template, a master plan that was enforced from the very beginning of the city's construction. Then comes the infrastructure, the hidden genius beneath the streets. A planned grid integrates advanced drainage and water supply systems directly into its layout. Channels run beneath avenues, wells are placed at regular intervals, and bathrooms in homes connect to a city-wide network. This is engineering on a civic scale, a commitment to public health and hygiene that is astonishing for its time. Finally, there is zoning, the intentional separation of space, a ceremonial center with temples and palaces, distinct from residential neighborhoods, distinct from industrial areas for pottery or metalworking. This isn't just practical, it's ideological. It tells people where they fit, what their role is, and who holds ultimate authority over the organization of life itself. So the difference between a simple geometric layout and a true planned grid system is the difference between drawing a few lines and writing an entire constitution in stone. It demands advanced surveying to lay out those perfect angles over hills and valleys. It requires a form of mathematics to calculate areas and maintain proportions. And most crucially, it necessitates a powerful, centralized authority with the vision to conceive it and the power to see it built over generations. These are the principles of high civilization. And the staggering fact is that societies were mastering this complex spatial language not in the Iron Age, but thousands of years earlier, during the Bronze Age and even the Neolithic period. They were writing this urban manifesto in a language we are only now beginning to fully decipher. To witness this urban manifesto in its first great expression, we must travel to the banks of the mighty Indus River over 4,500 years ago. Here, in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, the cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa rose from the fertile plains. They were the beating hearts of a civilization that stretched over 1 million square kilometers, yet their most enduring signature is not in grand statues or golden tombs, but in the quiet, relentless logic of their streets. Walk through Mohenjo-daro at its height. You move along wide, straight avenues running precisely north-south and east-west, dividing the city into large, uniform blocks. Branching off these main arteries are narrower lanes, then smaller alleys, creating a hierarchical flow of movement that feels astonishingly modern. Every building, from the largest granary to the most modest home, is constructed of standardized, kiln-fired bricks in a uniform ratio. This is not merely neat. This is a society that had mastered mass production and applied it to the very fabric of urban life. But the true genius of this grid lies beneath the streets. Integrated directly into the city plan is the world's first comprehensive urban sanitation system. Nearly every house had a bathing area and a toilet, with waste channels running along the streets, covered by bricks and equipped with inspection holes for maintenance. These channels fed into larger sewers that carried wastewater safely out of the city. This was public health engineered into the urban DNA, a silent promise of cleanliness and order for tens of thousands of residents. Why would a society invest such colossal effort in standardization and hygiene? The layout provides clues. There are no towering, opulent palaces that clearly overshadow the rest of the city. No monumental temples dedicated to a single, all-powerful ruler. Instead, we find large, well-built structures that seem civic in nature, like the Great Bath, a meticulously waterproofed public pool likely used for ritual purification. This suggests a different kind of power. The authority here may have been more theocratic or administrative, one that valued collective well-being, efficient trade, and social stability over the glorification of a single individual. The grid itself enforced a kind of equality. It managed the immense seasonal floods of the Indus River by providing clear drainage pathways. It facilitated trade, with carts moving easily on the straight roads to the city's dockyards. It created a predictable, legible environment where everyone knew their place, not by birthright displayed on a palace wall, but by their address within a flawless geometric order. And this leads to the most haunting part of the enigma. The people of the Indus Valley left behind thousands of inscriptions, a script etched on seals and pottery. But we cannot read a single word. Their language, their names, their laws, the very decrees that must have commanded this urban order, all remain silent. We are left with the physical city as their only true text. We see the proof of a powerful, centralized vision in every right-angled corner and every brick-lined drain, yet we cannot hear the voices of the planners who conceived it. What kind of society achieves this level of sophisticated, humane planning without leaving behind a clear story of kings and conquests? How did they maintain such rigorous standards across centuries and across hundreds of kilometers? The grid of Mohenjo-daro is not just an ancient city plan. It is a profound, unanswered question written in clay and stone. The silent, standardized order of the Indus Valley presents one answer to the challenge of civilization. But if we journey west to the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to ancient Mesopotamia, we find a completely different solution unfolding at the very same time. Here, the city did not begin with a surveyor's line. It began with a sacred heartbeat. The classic Mesopotamian city, like the legendary Uruk, grew organically, swirling outward from its central, towering ziggurat. This step temple was not just a building, it was the axis of the universe, the home of the city's patron deity, and the literal and figurative high point of the community. Streets curled around this sacred core like the growth rings of a tree, winding and narrow, following the paths of ancient footfalls rather than a planner's compass. This was a city shaped by accretion, by centuries of devotion, commerce, and daily life piling layer upon layer. The power structure here was visibly different. The temple complex, and later the adjoining palace, dominated the skyline and the social order. Urban form reflected a hierarchy centered on a king who was both a political ruler and the deity's chief servant. This model of organic, temple-centered growth was so successful it became the Mesopotamian norm for millennia. Yet, even within this tradition, the allure of the grid occasionally broke through. The proof lies in a remarkable and short-lived capital city called Dur-Sharrukin, built by the Neo-Assyrian king Sargon II in the 8th century before the Common Era. Here, amidst an empire known for its brutal military might, we find a startling shift. The city was laid out as an almost perfect square behind massive walls, with the royal palace and temples placed on a raised platform not at the organic center, but along one wall. The major avenues were straight, meeting at right angles to create large, regular blocks. This was a deliberate, conscious act of planning from a blank slate. Why would a Mesopotamian king, heir to the organic tradition of Uruk and Babylon, choose the grid? The answer lies in the message it sent. Dur-Sharrukin, which means Sargon's fortress, was not just a city, it was a monument to the king himself. The geometric order imposed upon the land was a direct metaphor for the order he imposed upon his empire. It was rational, controlled, and utterly subservient to his vision. Every straight line declared his power to reshape the world according to his will, free from the messy history of older, organically grown cities. This comparison is crucial. It shows us that the urban grid was never an inevitable stage of development, a box every advanced civilization was destined to check. It was a specific tool, a conscious choice among other viable and successful options. The organic city expressed a power rooted in deep tradition and divine connection. The planned grid expressed a power rooted in immediate human will and administrative control. One grew from the god downward, the other was imposed from the throne outward. Both models produced magnificent cities, proving that there is no single path to urban complexity. This makes the independent invention of the grid in distant places like the Indus Valley and the Americas even more mysterious. If it was just one option among many, why did so many disparate cultures with no contact reach for that same tool? What was it about the grid that spoke to the human mind facing the chaos of creating a city from nothing? The answer may lie not in the streets themselves, but in the sky above them. The Mesopotamian experiment with the grid was a declaration of royal power. But to find this idea applied with an almost surgical precision for an entirely different purpose, we must travel south to the banks of the Nile. Ancient Egypt presents a fascinating paradox. We know them for monuments of eternal scale, the pyramids and temples that seem to defy both gravity and time, born from a culture obsessed with cosmic order or math. Yet for a long time, scholars believed the Egyptians showed little interest in applying that order to their everyday towns, which were thought to grow organically in the shadow of their eternal stone sentinels. That assumption was shattered by the discovery of places like Kahun, built around 1890 years before the Common Era to house the priests and officials working on the pyramid of Pharaoh Senusret II. Kahun is a revelation. It was not a city that evolved. It was a piece of administrative equipment built in a single phase on a blank desert plateau. Its layout is a rigid, rectangular grid of streets, walled off from the world with one main gate for control. The plan is ruthlessly logical. A thick wall bisects the town, separating the larger, comfortable villas for high officials on one side from the small, uniform rows of houses for workers and artisans on the other. This was the grid not as a symbol of civic equality, but as a blueprint for social hierarchy and efficiency. Every aspect of life here was engineered. The standardized worker houses were designed for specific trades with spaces for tools and materials. Drainage channels were integrated into the straight streets. This was a machine for living, built to sustain a temporary, elite project, the construction of a god-king's tomb. It was a closed system, meant to be inhabited for a generation or two and then, quite possibly, abandoned, which is exactly what happened. But to see this only as a practical labor camp is to miss its deeper resonance. The Egyptian grid was always in conversation with the cosmos. While Kahun streets were laid out with a surveyor's precision, they were also aligned with cardinal directions, a practice rooted in a profound spiritual geography. The Nile River flowed from south to north. The sun rose in the east and set in the west. To align a structure with these axes was to harmonize it with the fundamental forces of creation. This practice reached its zenith in the ceremonial complexes around the pyramids, where processional causeways, temples, and even entire worker cities were positioned with astronomical accuracy, often aligning with specific stars or the solstice sun. So in the Egyptian mind, the straight line and the right angle were never merely practical. They were sacred geometry. The grid imposed human order on the chaos of the desert, but it did so by mirroring the perfect, unchanging order of the heavens. A worker in his standardized house at Kahun was, in a very real sense, occupying a designated cell in a vast, earthly model of the universe, contributing his labor to a project that would bridge earth and sky. This reveals a dual purpose for the grid that is uniquely clear in Egypt. It was a supreme tool for practical control, managing a specialized workforce and a complex, state-driven project with flawless efficiency. Simultaneously, it was an instrument of spiritual harmony, embedding a temporary, functional settlement within the eternal, cyclical order of Maat. The street plan was both an organizational chart and a prayer. This raises a compelling question. If the grid could be used for something as transient as a worker's town, and for something as eternal as a pyramid's alignment, what does that tell us about its fundamental nature? It suggests this urban form is not tied to a single type of society or a permanent vision. It is a versatile template, equally capable of enforcing a social hierarchy for a pharaoh's project or mapping the heavens for a priest's rituals. The genius of the grid lies in this very adaptability, but this adaptability makes its repeated, independent emergence across the globe even more perplexing. How did cultures separated by oceans and millennia all discover that straight lines could channel both earthly power and cosmic meaning? To find an answer, we must look to a place where the grid was not imposed from above by a king or a priest, but may have emerged from the very ground beneath people's feet. The rigid geometries of Egypt and Mesopotamia represent one powerful vision of order. But what happens when a civilization chooses a different kind of complexity? On the sun-drenched island of Crete, the Minoan culture flourished, famed for its vibrant art, maritime prowess, and the sprawling, multi-leveled palace of Knossos. At first glance, this palace is the absolute opposite of a grid. Its architecture feels organic, a maze of interconnected rooms, grand staircases, light wells, and storage magazines that seems to grow like a living organism. There is no grand axial avenue leading to a central temple. Instead, movement is channeled through a series of courtyards and corridors, creating a sense of mystery and layered privacy. This is the labyrinth, not just in myth but in stone, a design that celebrates fluidity, ceremony, and perhaps a more decentralized form of power. Yet, to assume the Minoans had no concept of urban planning would be a profound mistake. Step outside the palace walls and travel to a smaller coastal town like Gurnia. Here, the picture changes dramatically. Gurnia is not a labyrinth. It is a compact, hillside settlement organized with remarkable clarity. A single paved main street winds up the slope, functioning as the town's spine. From this central artery, a series of narrower, stone-stepped alleys branch off at right angles, climbing the hillside in a neat, terraced pattern. The houses, workshops, and small shrines are packed tightly along these lanes, creating a dense but highly legible community. This reveals a fascinating hybrid approach. The Minoans were masters of modular planning. They understood that different functions required different spatial logic. The palatial center, with its religious, administrative, and royal ceremonial duties, was designed as an intricate, inward-focused complex to manage elite activities and impress visitors. It was a world unto itself, but the supporting towns, the engines of daily life, craft production, and trade, were organized for efficiency and social cohesion. The linear plan of Gurnia facilitated movement, allowed neighbors to interact easily, and provided clear access from workshops down to the harbor. This modular thinking shows a sophisticated flexibility. The grid principle was not applied as a rigid, city-wide dogma as it was in Mohenjo-daro. Instead, it was used as a practical tool where it made the most sense in organizing communal residential and commercial space. The straight lines and right angles served the needs of merchants carrying goods, of artisans sharing resources, and of a community navigating its shared environment. It created order without overwhelming authoritarianism, structure without stifling the vibrant, adaptive spirit that defines Minoan culture. This Minoan model asks us to reconsider what we mean by early urban planning. Must it always be a grand, totalizing gesture that covers every inch of a city? Or can it be a set of adaptable principles applied selectively to solve specific problems? At Gurnia, the grid was not about imposing a cosmic order or displaying the absolute power of a single ruler. It was about making a hillside town work for the people who lived there. It was a pragmatic framework for community, proving that the logic of the straight line could be just as home in a bustling, intimate port town as it was in a pharaoh's desert compound or a sacred Indus Valley metropolis. The genius of the Minoans was in knowing when to build a labyrinth and when to build a lane. Their legacy suggests that the most enduring urban plans are not those that force one pattern onto everything, but those that understand the different rhythms of human life and design accordingly. If the grid could be this flexible in the Bronze Age, what other surprises might be waiting in places we have only begun to explore? Yet the labyrinthine streets of Minoan Crete represent just one path through the ancient world. To find the most dramatic evidence that the grid is a universal human idea, we must make an impossible leap across vast oceans and even greater spans of time to the ancient Americas. Here, separated by the Atlantic and Pacific from all Eurasian influence, civilizations were mastering urban geometry on a breathtaking scale, creating grids that were not copies but stunning convergences of the human mind. The proof stands in the highlands of central Mexico. The city of Teotihuacan, which began to flourish around 100 years before the Common Era, is a monument to planned order that rivals anything in the Old World. Its heart is the colossal Avenue of the Dead, a straight ceremonial roadway over 2 miles long, running precisely 15.5 degrees east of true north. This was no accident. This specific alignment was likely chosen so that the avenue would point directly at the setting sun on a key ceremonial date, or perhaps toward a sacred mountain peak. From this central axis, the entire city was laid out on a vast, precise grid. The Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon anchor major nodes within this geometric plan, their positions carefully calculated. The city's residential compounds, numbering in the thousands, were built in standardized square modules, creating a repeating cellular pattern across the urban landscape. This was a city designed as a single, coherent act of cosmic engineering, meant to harmonize human society with the cycles of the heavens. The planners of Teotihuacan were not just building houses and temples. They were constructing a model of the universe in stone and plaster, using the grid as their sacred geometry. Far to the south, in the Andes Mountains, another civilization applied the grid principle for a different, but equally sophisticated purpose. The Inca Empire, though famed for its organic, terraced settlements like Machu Picchu, also used planned grids for administrative control. At the center of Huánuco Pampa, a major provincial capital, lies a vast, empty plaza, perfectly rectangular and astonishingly level, carved from the mountain terrain. Surrounding this ceremonial void is a rigid grid of streets and walled compounds. This was not a chaotic market town. It was a stage for state ritual and a machine for imperial management. The empty plaza was designed to hold thousands of people for state-sponsored festivals, where the Inca would redistribute food and goods, reinforcing loyalty through spectacle and generosity. The surrounding gridded compounds likely housed temporary workers, artisans, and administrators serving the state. Here, the grid functioned as a tool of soft power, a geometric framework for integrating conquered peoples into the empire's economic and ceremonial cycles. The implications of these American grids are profound. Teotihuacan and Huánuco Pampa were built by cultures that had zero contact with Mohenjo-daro, Mesopotamia, or Egypt. They faced their own unique environmental pressures, from the high altitude of the Andes to the Valley of Mexico. They worshipped different gods and answered to different kinds of rulers. Yet, when confronted with the monumental challenge of organizing a complex urban society, of managing thousands of people and aligning their lives with cosmic or imperial order, they reached for the same elegant solution, the orthogonal grid. This is not diffusion of an idea from a single source. This is convergent cultural evolution. Just as wings evolved independently in birds, bats, and insects to solve the problem of flight, the urban grid evolved independently across the globe to solve the problem of complex social organization. It is a testament to a shared logic in the human mind when faced with scale, ceremony, and control. The straight line, the right angle, the repeating module, these are not European inventions exported to the world. They are fundamental tools of human imagination, rediscovered again and again wherever civilization reached a certain pitch of ambition. So the question shifts from who invented the grid first to a deeper mystery. Why does this particular pattern feel so inevitable, so right to human societies striving for order, whether they are building for the gods, for an emperor, or simply for a community on a hillside? What is it about this geometry that speaks to us across every divide of culture and continent? Across the Pacific, the grid served cosmic and imperial ambitions. But if we look to East Asia, we find this geometric tool being wielded for a purpose that was deeply philosophical, almost poetic in its intent. Ancient China developed what might be the world's most intellectually refined vision of the planned city, one where every street and wall was a character in a text written in earth and timber. This vision was codified in classical texts like the Rites of Zhu, which described the ideal capital, Wangcheng. The blueprint was a perfect square, oriented to the cardinal directions, surrounded by towering walls. 3 gates pierced each side, from which 12 straight avenues would run inward, converging at the very heart of the city. And at that precise center was not a public plaza or a market, but the emperor's palace, enclosed within its own fortified walls. This was a grid with a single, unambiguous focal point. The entire geometric order existed to manifest one idea: the Son of Heaven at the literal and symbolic center of the civilized world, mediating between the human realm and the cosmic order. The city itself was a model of the universe, with its walls representing the squared earth and its gates and avenues channeling the energies of the heavens. This was planning as sacred cosmology, where geometry served feng shui, the art of aligning human structures with the invisible flows of the natural world. Yet for all its theoretical perfection, the actual cities built across China's varied landscapes were masterful adaptations. The magnificent Tang Dynasty capital of Chang'an, one of the largest cities in the world at its height, took the Wangcheng ideal and made it breathe. It was a vast rectangle laid out on a near-flawless grid of broad north-south and east-west avenues. These colossal streets, some over 100 meters wide, created over 110 walled residential wards, each a miniature, gated neighborhood that could be locked down at night. The Imperial Palace complex was not at the exact geometric center, but it occupied a vast, dominant northern sector, still the political and ritual heart. So what was the primary function of this immense grid? It was not for the efficient flow of daily traffic, which was often restricted. It was for the spectacular, orderly procession of power. The grand avenues were stages for imperial parades and diplomatic receptions. The grid's strict hierarchy, from the palace down to the gated wards, physically mapped the Confucian social order onto the land, with the emperor and his officials at the top, followed by scholars, farmers, artisans, and merchants. Movement was controlled, visibility was managed, and every citizen knew their place within the geometric scheme. This reveals a profound cultural interpretation. The Chinese grid was a ritual container. It was less about managing sewage or commerce, though it did that too, and more about creating a permanent, physical diagram of philosophical and political harmony. The straight line was a moral principle, a manifestation of righteousness and proper conduct. To build a crooked city would be to invite cosmic and social disorder. In this way, China took the same geometric principle seen in Mohenjo-daro or Teotihuacan, the right angle and the cardinal orientation, and infused it with a unique cultural spirit. It became less an administrative tool for equality or a celestial calendar in stone, and more a three-dimensional textbook on statecraft and cosmic balance. The city was not just a place to live, it was a machine for producing and maintaining ideal social order, with the grid as its most essential component. This raises a final, pivotal question. We have seen the grid emerge independently as a tool for hygiene, for cosmic alignment, for imperial control, and for philosophical harmony. Each culture used the same basic template to solve its own unique equation of civilization. But if this idea is so powerful, so universally appealing to the human mind, then why did it ever disappear? Why, after these dazzling early experiments, did the geometric city fade from memory in so many parts of the world, only to be rediscovered millennia later? The answer lies not in the triumph of the grid, but in its startling and widespread collapse. The grid had collapsed, its logic fading in one region after another. But the human mind never forgets a powerful idea. It simply waits for the right moment to remember it. That moment arrived in the Eastern Mediterranean, not with the birth of a new concept, but with its philosophical rebirth. The stage was the city of Miletus, a prosperous Greek port on the coast of Asia Minor. In the year 479 before the Common Era, it lay in ruins destroyed by Persian forces. Its reconstruction presented a rare opportunity, a blank slate upon which a radical new vision for urban life could be drawn. The man entrusted with this task was Hippodamus, a figure who is less a known architect and more a name attached to a revolutionary ideal. What he designed for Miletus would become known as the Hippodamian Plan, and it would echo through history as the supposed birth of rational city planning in the West. But to call it a birth is to misunderstand history entirely. It was, in truth, a brilliant rediscovery and a profound reinterpretation. The physical components were familiar. Hippodamus laid out Miletus on a strict orthogonal grid of straight streets, creating uniform, rectangular city blocks. This geometric order was not new. What was revolutionary was the intention behind the lines. Previous grids from the Indus to Egypt often served a god-king, a priestly class, or an imperial administration. The Hippodamian grid served the citizen. At the heart of his plan was the agora, a large, open public square deliberately placed at the city's center. This was not a sealed palace courtyard or a sacred temple precinct reserved for elites. It was the people's space, the political, commercial, and social heart of the community. Around this agora, the grid organized residential neighborhoods into distinct wards, creating a sense of local identity within the larger whole. The plan was modular, repeatable, and above all, democratic in its spirit. It provided equal access to public spaces and created a clear, legible city where every free citizen could navigate and participate. Hippodamus was more than a planner, he was a philosopher. He wrote treatises on the ideal city-state, arguing that physical order could produce social and political harmony. His grid was a tool for enabling democratic life, for facilitating the face-to-face debates and shared responsibilities that defined the Greek polis. The straight streets were not just for efficient movement, they were for the equal distribution of civic space. The uniform blocks were not for state control, but for creating equitable neighborhoods. This was the genius of the Greek contribution. They did not invent the geometry. They invented a new reason for it. They took a planning principle that had been used for millennia to enforce hierarchy and cosmic order, and they repurposed it for a radical experiment in human self-governance. They gave the grid a political soul. So when we hail Miletus as the birthplace of the Western grid, we must be precise. It is not the birthplace of the geometric form, which is ancient and global. It is the birthplace of the idea that this form could be harnessed for a society of participating citizens. Hippodamus provided the theoretical framework, the philosophical justification that would later inspire Romans and, centuries after that, Renaissance thinkers. He formalized what others had practiced, wrapping the old tool in a powerful new narrative of civic equality and rational design. This makes the Greek moment profoundly significant, yet also curiously late in the long story of urban planning. It stands not as the origin point, but as a brilliant middle chapter, a moment when an ancient, almost instinctual human solution for order was consciously adopted and transformed to serve a daring new vision of what a city and its people could be. The philosophical rebirth of the grid in Greece gave it a new purpose, but its physical creation on the ground remained a monumental feat of engineering. How did ancient surveyors without steel tapes or laser levels mark out perfect right angles across miles of uneven terrain, ensuring a drain in Mohenjo-daro or a street in Teotihuacan ran flawlessly straight? The answer lies not in lost magic, but in a suite of brilliantly simple, yet devastatingly effective forgotten technologies. To lay out a city was to perform a grand act of applied mathematics, and it began with the most fundamental challenge, establishing a true right angle. The Romans are famous for their use of the groma, a simple but ingenious instrument. Picture a vertical staff with a horizontal crossbar from which plumb bobs were suspended on strings. By sighting along the strings, a surveyor could create perfectly perpendicular sight lines, literally drawing a cross of right angles onto the landscape. This tool was so central to Roman military camp construction that it became a symbol of their orderly expansion. But the crucial question is, where did the Romans get it? The groma's principle is so basic to geometry that it almost certainly predates Rome by millennia. The Egyptians, masters of pyramid alignment, used a very similar instrument called a merkit for stellar observations and likely for terrestrial surveying. It is a powerful reminder that foundational technologies are rarely invented once. They are inherited, adapted, and perfected across generations. The groma is not a Roman invention. It is a Roman adoption of a tool whose origins are lost in the deeper past, a tool that planners in the Indus Valley or ancient China likely used in some form to achieve their own geometric wonders. But a right angle is useless if the ground is not level. Before a single street could be marked, the entire site had to be made flat, a task of staggering labor. For this, ancient engineers developed sophisticated leveling instruments. The simplest was the chorobates, a long, water-filled trough on legs. By observing the water's surface, workers could determine a true horizontal plane over long distances. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, they used a version of the A-frame level, a tool that, when the plumb line at its apex aligned with a mark on the crossbar, indicated a level surface. These were not crude guesses. They were precise devices that allowed teams to systematically cut into hillsides and fill in valleys, creating the vast, flat platforms upon which cities like Teotihuacan were built. This leveling work was the silent, brutal foundation of all that followed, a testament to organized human effort on a colossal scale. With a level site and a method for creating right angles, the next step was measurement itself. This is where the true intellectual achievement shines through. These early civilizations did not measure with arbitrary sticks. They used standardized units, a concept critical for large-scale, cooperative construction. The most striking example comes from the Indus Valley, where archaeologists have discerned a consistent unit of length. They call it the Indus foot, measuring approximately 33.5 centimeters. This unit was used to dimension everything from the width of major streets, which were often exactly twice the unit, to the size of the standardized bricks themselves. This means a bricklayer in Harappa and a planner in Mohenjo-daro were working from the same invisible ruler, a shared standard that allowed for prefabrication and flawless assembly across hundreds of kilometers. Similarly, the Romans had their pes, the Greeks their foot, and the Chinese their kai. These were not just measurements, they were tools of empire and culture, allowing complex plans conceived in a central mind to be executed faithfully in distant locations by simply counting units. Behind all these tools lay a sophisticated, if practical, knowledge of geometry. The Pythagorean theorem, famously associated with the Greek philosopher 600 years later, was a relationship understood empirically by builders for thousands of years before it was given a name. To create a perfect square or to lay out a grid, you need to understand that a triangle with sides in a 3-4-5 ratio will always contain a right angle. Babylonian clay tablets show they worked with this principle. Egyptian rope stretchers, the original surveyors, used knotted ropes to create these exact triangles on the ground, a method still taught in geometry classes today. This practical geometry was the silent engine of urban planning. It transformed abstract concepts of order into physical reality, allowing a planner to say, "Make this avenue run precisely north," and a team with ropes, stakes, and a water level to make it so. Reconstructing the process makes the achievement tangible. Imagine a team on a virgin site. First, using stars or the sun, they establish a true north-south meridian line, the city's sacred spine. Using their leveling instruments, they prepare the ground. Then, with their groma or its equivalent, they strike a perpendicular east-west line from that meridian, creating the foundational cross. From this intersection, using their standardized unit measured out with knotted ropes or marked rods, they begin walking off the dimensions of the first city block, driving stakes into the earth. The process repeats, a geometric net slowly spreading across the landscape, transforming wilderness into a diagram of human intention. This was not construction, it was inscription. They were writing the first chapter of their city's story not with words, but with lines of sight and measured distances. The true marvel, then, is not the existence of the grid, but the consistent intellectual framework that made it possible across disparate eras and continents. It reveals a universal human toolkit for imposing order, a toolkit containing standardized measurement, empirical geometry, and simple, brilliant mechanical aids. This shared technological foundation is what makes the independent emergence of gridded cities not a bizarre coincidence, but a logical outcome. When a society reached a certain scale and ambition, it naturally reached for these tools. Which makes the final piece of the puzzle the most haunting of all. If this knowledge was so powerful, so fundamental to building civilization, how could it ever be forgotten? Why did the bright geometric lines of Mohenjo-daro fade into soil and the planning principles of the Indus Valley vanish into silence, only for other cultures to rediscover them millennia later? The disappearance of this knowledge may be an even greater mystery than its early appearance. A city's plan is a map of its social structure, written not in words but in space. The silent geometry of the grid was never neutral. It was a powerful tool for organizing people, for telling them where they belonged and how they should live. By analyzing how these early grids functioned, we see them not just as feats of engineering, but as profound experiments in social engineering. In the workers' town of Kahan, the rigid Egyptian grid served as a blueprint for a temporary, closed society. That thick wall bisecting the town did more than block wind. It was a physical manifestation of class. On one side, high officials lived in spacious villas. On the other, artisans and laborers occupied rows of identical small houses. Your address, determined by the grid, was a direct indicator of your social rank and your role in the pharaoh's project. The design ensured efficiency and control, making the workforce manageable and visible, a machine where every part had its designated place. This was the grid enforcing a clear top-down hierarchy. Contrast this with the sprawling order of Mohenjo-daro. Here, the grid seems to tell a different story. While there were richer and poorer neighborhoods, the difference is subtler. The standardized bricks, the uniform block sizes, the integrated sanitation reaching even modest homes, all suggest a society that invested in a baseline level of civic equality and public welfare. The grid facilitated movement and trade for everyone, not just an elite. It managed environmental challenges like floods for the collective good. In this context, the geometric order may have promoted stability and access, a framework for a large, complex society to function with a degree of shared prosperity. Yet, even here, the grid enabled a form of soft control. Those wide, straight streets and uniform blocks made the city legible not just to its residents, but to those in authority. Movement could be observed, patterns could be monitored. It created a sense of transparent order where deviation might be easily noticed. In the Chinese capital of Chang'an, this concept reached its zenith. The grid of walled wards, each with gates locked at night, transformed the city into a collection of controllable units. It beautifully mapped the Confucian social hierarchy onto the landscape, physically separating different classes and professions while still containing them within the master plan of imperial power. So we see the grid's dual nature. It could be used to provide equitable infrastructure and a sense of shared civic space, as the Greeks intended. Or it could be wielded to segregate, surveil, and reinforce rigid social strata, as seen in Kahan and Chang'an. The geometry itself was a blank slate. The intentions of the planners gave it meaning. This forces us to ask a reflective question, one that echoes in our own cities today. What is the trade-off between efficient, organized communal life and individual freedom or organic growth? The grid offers clarity, predictability, and ease of management. But it can also feel impersonal, restrictive, and hostile to the messy, spontaneous interactions that often give a city its soul. These ancient planners were grappling with the fundamental tension of civilization: how to balance the needs of the many with the autonomy of the one, how to create order without stifling life. Their gridded cities were early, monumental attempts to answer that enduring human puzzle. They show us that every street layout, every zoning decision, is ultimately a statement about the kind of society we wish to build. But the grid's power was not confined to organizing society on Earth. Its ultimate purpose for many cultures was to connect that society to the heavens above. The straight lines and perfect angles were a language for speaking to the gods, a way to embed cosmic order into the very ground people walked upon. This spiritual dimension transforms the grid from a practical tool into a profound act of faith, turning an entire city into a temple, an observatory, or a living calendar. At Teotihuacan, the evidence is written across the landscape in monumental scale. The city's central axis, the Avenue of the Dead, is not aligned to true north. It is offset by 15.5 degrees to the east. For decades, this was seen as a puzzling error, but researchers now believe this precise alignment was intentional, pointing directly at the setting sun on the day of its first zenith passage, a key date in the Mesoamerican agricultural and ceremonial cycle. Furthermore, the peaks of the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon are not randomly placed. They form deliberate sight lines with distant mountain peaks on the horizon, creating a sacred geography that tied the city's built environment to the enduring natural world. The grid itself, with its standardized residential compounds, can be seen as a microcosm of this cosmic order, a repeating pattern mirroring the predictable cycles of the stars and seasons. Every citizen in their uniform home lived within a grand, earthly model of the universe. This idea of the city as a cosmic diagram finds perhaps its purest philosophical expression in ancient China. The classical ideal of Wangcheng, the royal city, was a perfect square oriented to the 4 cardinal directions. Its 12 gates, 3 on each side, symbolized the 12 months of the year. The palace at the exact center represented the pole star, the unmoving axis around which the heavens revolved. This was not just symbolism, it was a physical manifestation of the mandate of heaven, the belief that the emperor's right to rule was granted by celestial forces. By building his capital according to this sacred geometry, the emperor was aligning his earthly administration with the fundamental order of the cosmos. His city became a conduit for harmony, ensuring that human affairs would flow in sync with the rhythms of nature and the will of the heavens. A crooked street or a misaligned gate was not merely poor planning, it was a potential source of cosmic and social disorder. This spiritual imperative explains the relentless pursuit of geometric perfection. When a culture believes its survival and prosperity depend on maintaining a sacred bond with the sun, the moon, or the stars, then surveying becomes a priestly act and a level foundation stone is a prayer. The grid was the medium for that prayer. It allowed a society to take the vast, incomprehensible movements of the celestial sphere and translate them into a tangible, walkable reality. A farmer in Teotihuacan might not understand astronomy, but by living in a house aligned to the city's grand axis, he participated in that cosmic order every single day. The city's layout taught him his place not just in society but in the universe. This elevates our understanding of these early planners immeasurably. They were not just engineers or bureaucrats, they were cosmologists. They sought to solve the most profound human mystery of all, our relationship with the forces that govern life itself. By building a grid, they were attempting to anchor their community to eternity, to create a space where human time and cosmic time could meet. The straight line was their bridge between the earthly and the divine. So when we look at the ruins of these gridded cities, we are not just looking at clever urban design. We are looking at maps of ancient sky lore, stone petitions to the gods for balance and blessing. The grid was their answer to the chaos of existence, a geometric sanctuary drawn against the void. Yet for all its spiritual and social power, the grid served another master, one just as demanding as any god or king: commerce. The straight line is also the shortest distance between production and profit, and this economic reality may have been one of the most compelling reasons for ancient planners to reach for their measuring ropes. In the bustling heart of a complex society, efficiency translates directly into wealth and stability, and nothing is more efficient than a predictable, legible city. Consider the wide, straight avenues of Mohenjo-daro, paved and meticulously maintained. These were not merely ceremonial pathways, they were the Bronze Age equivalent of freight corridors. Carts laden with grain, pottery, or precious stones could move from the city's granaries and workshops directly to the riverside dockyards with minimal obstruction. The uniform block sizes meant that loading areas, storage yards, and market spaces could be planned in advance, creating a seamless flow of goods. This was a city engineered for trade, both within its walls and across the vast networks that connected the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia. The grid reduced what economists call transaction costs, the friction of doing business. In an organic, tangled city, moving goods is slow, finding a merchant is difficult, and establishing fair measurements for land or produce is chaotic. The grid solved these problems with geometry. Standardized plots meant predictable property values and easier taxation. A city official could walk a straight street, count uniform blocks, and assess levies based on clear, repeatable units of area. This was administration made simple, turning urban space into a measurable, taxable asset for the state. This principle of standardization extended to the very materials of the city itself. The uniform, kiln-fired bricks of the Indus Valley are a testament to economic thinking on an industrial scale. By adopting a single, optimal brick size and ratio, the civilization enabled mass production. Bricks made in Harappa would fit perfectly in a wall in Mohenjo-daro, hundreds of kilometers away. This meant construction projects could be planned with precise material estimates, workshops could specialize, and trade in building materials itself became a streamlined, reliable industry. The grid facilitated this by creating the demand for such standardization, requiring thousands upon thousands of identical units to fill its geometric framework. Markets, the pulsating hearts of urban economy, also thrive on order. In a gridded city, a central marketplace can be designated at a key intersection, with easy access from all residential quarters. The regularity of the streets ensures that shoppers and merchants from all parts of the city can converge there without getting lost in a maze. Furthermore, the grid allows for the logical zoning of different trades, one street for potters, another for metalworkers, creating districts that become hubs of specialized production and commerce. This organization does more than just keep the streets tidy, it builds trust. A merchant from a distant land arriving in a planned port city like Miletus or Lothal, another Indus Valley center, would immediately understand its logic. He could find the docks, the main thoroughfares, the market square, and the quarters for foreign traders with ease. This lowered the risk of doing business in a strange place and encouraged the flow of goods, ideas, and wealth. The grid, in this light, was a powerful economic signal. It broadcast to the world that here was a society that valued fairness, predictability, and efficiency, that it had the administrative muscle to enforce contracts and protect commerce. It turned the city into a reliable machine for generating and managing surplus, the essential fuel for any civilization aiming to support artists, priests, soldiers, and builders. So while cosmic alignment spoke to the heavens and social zoning spoke to the community, the straight street spoke directly to the merchant's ledger. It promised that here goods would move, taxes would be clear, and deals could be struck on a foundation as solid as the geometry that laid out the town. This pragmatic driver, the need to make complex economic life function smoothly, may have been the quiet, relentless force that made the grid's early adoption not just an artistic or spiritual choice, but an indispensable one for any society on the brink of true urban scale. The orderly streets of an ancient city served the market and the temple, but they also answered a far more urgent human need, the need for clean water. Perhaps the most critical, life-sustaining function of these early grids was not to organize space above ground, but to manage the elemental force of water flowing beneath it. In an era without modern medicine, the survival of a dense urban population depended utterly on separating the clean from the contaminated, on mastering hydraulics with the same precision used to survey a straight avenue. The grid, with its predictable, repeating pattern, became the perfect skeleton upon which to build a city's circulatory system, transforming urban planning into a public health revolution thousands of years early. Look at Mohenjo-daro. Its geometric layout was not an isolated design. It was the visible surface of a hidden, subterranean network of genius. Nearly every house had its own bathing area and a toilet, a private luxury unheard of in most of the world for millennia to come. But the real innovation was what happened next. Waste from these homes flowed into brick-lined channels that ran beneath the streets, carefully covered by stone slabs. These channels sloped gently, using gravity to carry wastewater toward larger, main sewers that exited the city walls. Maintenance shafts were placed at regular intervals, allowing for cleaning and inspection. This was not a haphazard addition, it was a system engineered into the city's foundational plan. The straight streets and uniform blocks made calculating slopes and laying these channels a predictable task. The grid provided the template, and the builders filled it with a network that protected the community from the devastating illnesses that could fester in stagnant water and waste. This relationship between geometry and water management was not unique to the Indus Valley. At Teotihuacan, the planners faced a different challenge. The city was built in a valley subject to seasonal torrents. Their solution was to integrate hydraulic control into the grand urban design. They deliberately channeled the San Juan River, straightening its course to align with the city's grid, effectively turning a natural waterway into a managed component of the street plan. They also constructed massive embankments and complex drainage systems beneath the Avenue of the Dead and the Great Plazas, designed to divert floodwaters away from sacred and residential structures. The city's layout itself became a giant water management scheme, where the orientation of buildings and the grading of open spaces all worked to control the flow of rain and runoff. Water was not an afterthought, it was a central design parameter. The principle extended to supply as well as drainage. In many gridded cities, wells were placed at regular, convenient intervals within the residential blocks, ensuring no household was too far from a source of fresh water. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, a large, waterproofed public pool, likely served ritual purposes, but it also stands as a monumental testament to the civilization's hydraulic engineering prowess, requiring an understanding of watertight seals, inflow, and drainage. This systematic integration of water infrastructure from the grand bath to the humble house drain represents a profound leap in communal well-being. It meant that thousands of people could live in close proximity without succumbing to the plagues that would ravage much later and less planned medieval cities in Europe. Mastering this hydraulic equation was a non-negotiable prerequisite for the very existence of a large, dense, permanent settlement. A village can rely on a single river or spring. A city of tens of thousands cannot. It requires a distributed, reliable, and sanitary system. The orthogonal grid provided the logical framework for that system. It allowed engineers to plan water networks in modules, to calculate gradients across long distances, and to ensure that every sector of the city was serviced. In this light, the grid was far more than an aesthetic choice or a social diagram. It was a survival technology. The straight line was a tool for public health, a method for securing the most fundamental resource of life itself. A city that could not manage its water would drown in its own waste or perish from thirst, no matter how grand its temples or how powerful its rulers. The early planners understood this intimately. Their geometric visions were, at their core, blueprints for sustaining life at a scale never before attempted. They built not just for the spirit or the economy, but for the basic physical resilience of the community. This realization reframes our entire view of these ancient marvels. We are not just looking at the birthplace of urban planning, we are looking at the birthplace of civic engineering, a conscious, collective effort to defy the natural threats that came with congregating in such vast numbers. The grid was their shield against chaos, a geometric order imposed not only on society, but on the very flow of the elements. The grid's silent geometry created a language of control, but that language needed an alphabet. Its fundamental letters were not words, but things standardized, identical, and endlessly repeatable objects. This is the hidden power of uniformity, a principle visible in the very bricks that built the earliest planned cities. In the Indus Valley, this concept reached an almost industrial level. Every single kiln fired brick, from the foundations of Mohenjo-daro to the walls of distant Harappa, conformed to a precise, universal ratio. The dimensions were typically 1:2:4 units. This was not a casual choice. It meant a bricklayer anywhere in the civilization could build a wall without cutting or adjusting, knowing each brick would lock perfectly into place with the next. This standardization transformed construction from a craft into a system. It allowed for precise material estimates, the prefabrication of components, and the rapid, reliable replication of architectural forms across a vast territory. The grid demanded this uniformity, and the uniform brick made the grid possible on a colossal scale. This physical standardization of materials had a direct and powerful counterpart in the abstraction of space. The grid itself created standardized plots of land, uniform city blocks, equal-sized residential lots, predictable modules for temples and markets. This was a revolutionary development. For the first time, urban space became quantifiable, divisible, and comparable. A plot in one ward was mathematically identical to a plot in another. This geometric predictability gave birth to a new kind of power, the power of bureaucracy. Imagine an ancient tax official. In an organically grown city, assessing property for taxation is a nightmare of negotiation and guesswork. Every plot is a unique, irregular shape, but in a gridded city, that official simply needs to know the standard unit of measurement, the Indus foot, the Roman pes, the Greek pous. He can walk down a straight street, count the uniform plots, and calculate the area and its corresponding tax obligation with simple arithmetic. The city became legible to its rulers. Its complexity was reduced to a spreadsheet written on the land itself. This legibility enabled control at a distance, the essential ingredient for scaling a state beyond a single charismatic leader's immediate reach. A governor in a provincial capital could send instructions to a town planner hundreds of kilometers away, saying, "Build a new district with blocks of 100 standard units by 50. The planner, using the same tools and units, could execute that order with perfect fidelity, creating a recognizable outpost of imperial power. The grid was a template for empire. It allowed administrative systems to replicate themselves geographically. The Roman military camp, the castrum, is the ultimate example of this. Wherever the legion marched, it would lay out the same grid plan for its temporary fortress, with the commander's tent at the central intersection, the barracks in standardized blocks, and the gates in the same positions. A soldier transferred from Britain to Syria would immediately know his way around because the geometry of control was always the same. This repeatable spatial order reduced the chaos of conquest and colonization to a manageable, bureaucratic procedure. The link is profound and often overlooked. The uniform brick and the uniform plot were not just convenient, they were the physical foundation of the written record, the census, and the tax roll. They turned land from a vague territory into a commodity that could be owned, traded, and taxed by the state. This ability to measure, record, and regulate based on predictable units is the very essence of early state formation. The grid did not merely house a bureaucracy, it created the conditions for bureaucracy to exist and thrive. It provided the consistent, rational framework that made large-scale administration not just possible but efficient. The straight street was more than a path for carts, it was a column in a ledger. The right-angled block was more than a neighborhood, it was an entry in a registry. By making the city legible, the grid made it governable on a scale previously unimaginable, proving that sometimes the most powerful tool of an empire is not a sword, but a surveyor's stake and a standard unit of measure. A city's geometric order promised control within, but it posed a stark vulnerability to threats from without. The wide, straight avenues that allowed for efficient trade and grand processions also created perfect corridors for an invading force. An army could march down these open streets with clear lines of sight, facing minimal obstacles or ambush points. This presents a fascinating paradox. How did these early civilizations, many of which faced constant conflict, reconcile their love for the open grid with the basic need for urban defense? The answer reveals a sophisticated, layered approach to security, one that often placed the ceremonial heart of the city above pure militaristic calculation. Look at the layout of Harappa or Mohenjo-daro. The lower towns were arranged in their famous grids, open and orderly, but rising beside them, often on a raised mound of earth, was a separate walled citadel. This fortified stronghold, containing granaries, elite residences, and possibly temples, served as the final redoubt. The design philosophy is clear. The grid managed daily civic and economic life for the general population, while a concentrated, defensible node protected the ruling authority, the food supply, and the most sacred symbols. Defense was not abandoned, it was compartmentalized. The city was not a single fortress, it was a system with a fortified core. This principle stands in sharp contrast to the organic, winding streets of a medieval European town, which were themselves a form of defense. Those narrow, crooked lanes were a nightmare for an invading force. breaking up formations and offering countless opportunities for defenders to attack from hidden doorways or rooftops. Every turn was a potential trap. That urban form was born from a world where security was the paramount, all-consuming concern, woven into the very fabric of every neighborhood. For many early grid planners, however, other values took precedence. At Teotihuacan, the overwhelming design priority was cosmic alignment and ceremonial procession along the Avenue of the Dead. The city's immense scale and geometric perfection were statements of spiritual and political power, meant to awe both residents and visitors from allied or subjugated territories. Its defense likely relied more on its sheer size, its garrison, and its regional dominance than on any tactical advantage built into its street plan. The ancient Chinese ideal, as seen in the classical texts, also reveals this hierarchy of values. The walls surrounding the perfect square of Wangcheng were colossal and formidable, but the gates were numerous and the internal streets were straight, leading directly to the center. The plan prioritized the symbolic order of the cosmos and the unimpeded authority of the emperor at the axis. The belief system held that proper alignment with heaven was the ultimate source of security and legitimacy. A city correctly oriented was a city protected by the mandate of heaven itself, a concept considered more powerful than any maze of streets. This creates a revealing spectrum. On one end, you have the later medieval organic city, where defense was the primary shaper of urban form, resulting in an inward-turned, difficult-to-navigate maze. On the other end, you have cities like Teotihuacan or the idealized Chinese capital, where celestial order and political symbolism were the primary drivers, producing open, monumental grids. In the middle, you have hybrid systems like the Indus Valley cities, which blended an open grid for living with a separate, fortified citadel for ultimate security. Each model represents a different calculation, a different answer to the question of what a city is fundamentally for. Is it a fortress for survival, a ceremonial center to commune with the gods, or an efficient machine for economic and social life? The early grids suggest that for their builders, the compelling need to impose a grand, rational, and often sacred order on the community frequently outweighed the tactical imperatives of turning the entire city into a defensive weapon. They chose legibility over secrecy, ceremony over choke points, and cosmic harmony over martial complexity. This choice speaks volumes about their confidence, their priorities, and their vision of what made a civilization truly strong. So we are left with a puzzle that defies our traditional timelines. The most sophisticated principles of urban planning do not appear at the expected pinnacle of ancient history, but shockingly early, scattered across the globe during the Bronze Age and even before. This is the conundrum that quietly upends our linear narrative of human progress. If civilization advances in a steady climb from simple to complex, why do we find these bursts of genius, these fully formed systems of geometry, hydraulics, and social organization, appearing like sudden flashes of lightning in the deep past, only to fade and be forgotten for centuries? Historians grapple with several compelling theories, each offering a different lens on this mystery. One powerful catalyst may have been climate change. The transition out of the last ice age and the subsequent stabilization of climates created new environmental pressures and opportunities. As river valleys like the Indus and the Nile became more predictable, they also became magnets for larger populations. But with denser settlement came greater risk, the threat of catastrophic floods, droughts, or soil depletion. In this light, the grid may have been a survival strategy born from collective crisis. Organizing thousands of people into a standardized, efficient system with managed water and stored grain was not a luxury of a mature state. It was the prerequisite for one. The geometric order was a direct response to environmental stress, a way to impose human reliability on an unpredictable world. Another theory looks inward to the architecture of the human mind itself. Is there something inherently appealing, even cognitively satisfying, about the right angle and the straight line? When faced with the chaos of founding a new settlement, the act of imposing a geometric grid creates immediate legibility. It reduces the overwhelming complexity of planning for thousands into a repeatable, modular process. This cognitive preference for order may have emerged independently wherever societies reached a threshold of scale and collective purpose. The grid, then, is not an invention to be diffused from a single source, but a logical discovery like mathematics or pottery, arising naturally when human groups confront similar problems of complexity. Then there is the more speculative yet tantalizing possibility of lost contact. Could faint, forgotten threads of exchange have connected distant cultures, allowing ideas to travel across vast distances? While there is no evidence for direct contact between, say, the Indus Valley and Peru, the concept of indirect diffusion through long chains of intermediary cultures cannot be entirely dismissed. Perhaps the core idea of planning, the mere notion that a city could be designed as a whole before it was built, was a seed that traveled slowly along trade routes, adapting to each new culture it touched. This theory is the hardest to prove, but it speaks to our desire to see the ancient world as interconnected. Ultimately, the most humbling explanation may be that human history does not move in a straight, predictable line. Complexity can arise in sudden pulses, driven by unique convergences of environment, leadership, and belief. A society can leap forward in a brilliant, concentrated burst of innovation, creating systems so advanced they seem out of place in time. And then, just as suddenly, that knowledge can contract, become overspecialized, or be lost to environmental shifts or social upheaval. The grid cities of the Bronze Age challenge our deep-seated assumption of historical inevitability, the idea that later societies are always more advanced than earlier ones. They force us to consider that progress is not a ladder, but a landscape with peaks of achievement that can rise in any era, in any corner of the world. These early planners reached a summit of urban thought, gazed out at a horizon of possibility, and then the path they carved was covered over by the sands of time, waiting to be found again. The geometric order of these ancient cities did not simply evolve into our modern world. In many cases, it vanished completely, leaving behind silent ruins and a profound intellectual void. This legacy of loss is perhaps the most haunting part of the story. The sophisticated principles of Mohenjo-daro's sanitation, the cosmic alignments of Teotihuacan, the modular planning of the Minoans, they were not passed down in an unbroken chain. They were abandoned, their knowledge fading like a forgotten language, forcing later cultures to start from scratch or stumble upon the same ideas anew. This cyclical pattern of loss and rediscovery reveals a startling truth about human history. Technological and intellectual regression is not just possible, it is a recurring theme. Civilizations can reach dazzling peaks of understanding, only to have that knowledge contract, become overspecialized, or be shattered by social collapse, environmental change, or simply the shifting priorities of a new era. The great grid cities of the Indus Valley, for instance, entered a long period of decline around 1900 years before the Common Era. The precise reasons are still debated by scholars, involving shifts in river courses and broader climatic changes that disrupted the agricultural foundation of their society. As the cities emptied, the intricate knowledge required to maintain their planned order, the standardized brick ratios, the hydraulic engineering of the drains, the very concept of city-wide geometric planning slowly dissipated. The grid itself was buried under silt and sand, not to be seen again for over 3,000 years. This disappearance was so complete that when archaeologists first uncovered Mohenjo-daro in the 1920s, they were utterly bewildered by its modernity. struggling to fit it into a historical timeline that had always placed such sophistication much later. The rediscovery cycle often depended on a fragile thread of preservation: Greek philosophical and architectural texts, which formalized the Hippodamian ideal of the grid for civic life, survived the fall of their world. These scrolls were preserved, copied, and studied, first by the Romans who admired and adapted Greek culture. The Romans, pragmatic imperialists, took the Greek philosophical framework for the grid and fused it with their own genius for engineering and military organization, creating the castrum plan and applying ordered layouts to colonial towns across Europe. But even this thread was nearly severed. With the dissolution of the Roman Empire and the onset of what historians once called the Dark Ages, the centralized authority and technical bureaucracy needed for large-scale urban planning fragmented across Europe. The dense, winding, organically grown medieval town, focused on immediate defense and parish life, became the norm. The grand, geometric vision of the city as a conscious, unified project seemed lost. Then came the second great rediscovery, the Renaissance. Scholars, artists, and architects, hungry to revive the perceived glory of antiquity, poured over the rediscovered classical texts of Rome and Greece. In the pages of Vitruvius's architectural treatise and the idealized city plans of Renaissance thinkers, they found the blueprint for the grid all over again. To them, it was a revolutionary rediscovery of Roman and Greek genius. They had no idea that this same principle of orthogonal order had been mastered millennia earlier by cultures unknown to them. This pattern makes the early appearance of these grids not just an archaeological curiosity, but a deeply poignant human achievement. It means that brilliance is not cumulative by default. A society's knowledge is a candle flame, vulnerable to the winds of change. The people of the Indus Valley solved problems of urban living that European cities would struggle with into the 19th century. Yet their solutions left no textbook for others to follow, only ruins for us to decipher. This cyclical journey from peak to valley and back again challenges our linear notion of progress. It suggests that human history is less a steady climb and more a series of plateaus. Some reached astonishingly early, later abandoned, and then reached once more by a different path. The story of the urban grid is therefore a story of resilience but also of profound fragility. It asks us to look at our own sprawling, planned cities and wonder, what foundational knowledge do we take for granted? And what would happen if, like so many before us, we somehow let it slip away? Rome, then, stands not at the beginning of this story, but at a pivotal midpoint. To truly measure its contribution, we must place its famous grid side by side with those of the earlier pioneers, comparing not just lines on a map, but the very spirit behind them. The Roman military camp, the castrum, offers the perfect case study. At first glance, the similarities are striking. It is a rigid orthogonal grid laid out with a surveyor's groma, creating uniform blocks for barracks, stables, and storage. It uses standardized dimensions, a modular template that could be replicated anywhere from the deserts of Syria to the forests of Britain. In these practical mechanics, the Romans were applying the same timeless toolkit of geometry and measurement used at Mohenjo-daro and Kahan. Yet the purpose, the driving force behind this geometry, marks a profound divergence. The grid of the Indus Valley seemed designed for civic life and collective resilience, a permanent home for a complex society. The Egyptian grid at Kahan was a closed system for a specialized, temporary workforce. The Roman castrum, however, was something else entirely, a machine for conquest and control. It was not a city born from a community's need for order, but a spatial weapon deployed to subdue territory and implant Roman authority on foreign soil. Its primary function was logistical and military efficiency, enabling the rapid deployment of troops, the secure storage of supplies, and the clear chain of command from the commander's tent at the central intersection. This grid was a blueprint for occupation. When the legion moved on, this temporary camp often became the kernel of a permanent colonial town, its geometric order now serving to organize veterans, settlers, and subjugated local populations. The grid became a lasting imprint of Roman power, a constant physical reminder of the empire's rational, impersonal, and inescapable system. This comparison reframes the Roman achievement in a clearer light. Their genius was not in conceiving the idea of the orthogonal plan, a concept already ancient by their time. Their genius lay in systematization and scale. They took a pre-existing planning principle and industrialized its application, turning it into a repeatable formula for empire building. They paired it with an unrivaled infrastructure of roads, aqueducts, and legal codes, creating an integrated system of control that could stretch for thousands of miles. Where earlier grids might have served a single sacred city or a specialized community, the Roman grid became a network, a cellular structure replicating itself across continents to administer diverse peoples and extract resources. Their contribution was one of engineering endurance and bureaucratic pragmatism. They built upon a conceptual foundation laid by forgotten pioneers across the globe, but they built with a different ambition: to tile the known world with a single, uniform pattern of authority. So when we walk through the ruins of a Roman colonial town with its straight decumanus and cardo streets, we are witnessing the culmination of an ancient idea, now harnessed to a new kind of power. The geometry is familiar, but the message has shifted. It speaks less of cosmic harmony or civic equality, and more of a simple, overwhelming fact: Rome was here, and its order is the only order that remains. This realization invites a final, sweeping question. If Rome was the great synthesizer, applying this ancient template on an imperial scale, what happened after its fall? Did the grid vanish once more into the shadows, or did it find a new purpose, waiting to be rediscovered again for the modern world? A blank grid is a canvas of pure potential. But the moment a culture begins to fill it with streets and temples, they are not just building a city, they are writing a declaration. This geometric order was always more than a practical tool for drainage or defense. It was a profound ideological statement, a non-verbal language broadcast in stone and earth, designed to be read by citizens and rivals alike. The empty plan became a vessel filled with the deepest beliefs and ambitions of the society that drew it. For the Egyptian pharaoh, imposing a rigid grid like that of the workers' town at Kahan was an act of cosmic defiance. The surrounding desert represented Isfit, chaos, the formless void that threatened the ordered world of Mat. By carving a perfect rectangle of straight lines and right angles from that wilderness, the king demonstrated his divine power to subdue chaos itself. The grid was proof that his will could structure the very earth, organizing a temporary army of laborers into a flawless, hierarchical machine to serve his eternal tomb. It was propaganda of the most tangible kind, visible to every priest, official, and worker who lived within its bounds, a daily reminder that the pharaoh's authority was the sole source of order in a perilous world. Half a world away, the Chinese emperor spoke a different dialect of this geometric language. His ideal capital, Wangcheng, was a grid conceived as a sacred diagram. Its perfect square mirrored the squared earth, its 12 gates symbolized the months, and its palace at the exact center represented the unmoving pole star. Here, the grid was not a weapon against chaos, but an instrument for cosmic harmony. By building according to this celestial blueprint, the emperor physically anchored his rule to the fundamental order of the heavens. He was not imposing his will upon the cosmos, he was aligning his earthly administration with it. Every straight avenue leading to his palace reinforced the message that he was the son of heaven, the vital pivot between the human realm and the divine. The grid's geometry legitimized his rule, telling his people and foreign envoys that this city, and by extension this empire operated with the blessing and logic of the universe itself. Then there is the radical voice of the Greek Polis, heard in the plan of Miletus. After its destruction, the city was rebuilt not for a god-king or to mirror the stars, but for the citizen. The Hippodamian grid, centered on the open agora, made a bold ideological claim that civic space should be shared equally. The uniform blocks and straight streets provided equal access to the political and commercial heart of the city. This geometry embodied the revolutionary idea of isonomia, equality before the law. It was a physical framework for democratic participation, ensuring that no neighborhood was isolated from the center of debate and decision. The grid itself became a symbol of the Polis values, arguing that rational, transparent design could foster a community of peers, where order emerged not from a monarch's decree, but from the collective life of free citizens. In each case, the same basic template conveyed a unique cultural truth. The grid could be a demonstration of absolute control, a map of celestial harmony, or a blueprint for civic equality. It was propaganda because it made ideology experiential. You did not need to read a royal decree to understand the pharaoh's power. You felt it in the unyielding lines of your walled compound. You did not need a philosophical treatise to grasp the emperor's cosmic role. You walked it on avenues aligned with the poles. You did not need to hear a speech on democracy to sense its spirit. You lived it in a city where every path led to the people's square. This transformative power explains why the grid was such a compelling tool for founders and conquerors. It allowed a new state, or a new idea of the state, to inscribe itself permanently onto the landscape. A rival kingdom viewing the perfect, daunting geometry of a planned capital would understand the formidable organizational will behind it. A citizen moving through its predictable streets would internalize its message of stability and belonging. The grid created a reality so orderly, so intentional, that it made the authority behind it seem natural, inevitable, and right. It turned abstract principles of power into the daily reality of a morning walk, proving that sometimes the most persuasive argument a civilization can make is not spoken at all, but laid out silently for miles in every direction. That silent geometric argument continues to shape the ground beneath our feet today. The legacy of those ancient planners is not confined to ruins and textbooks. It is the very skeleton of our modern world. Look at a map of Manhattan, its relentless north-south avenues and east-west streets creating a legendary grid of numbered order. Or consider the bold, futuristic plan of Brasilia, conceived in the 1950s as a city shaped like an airplane or a bird. Its monumental axis and superquadra residential blocks a stark, geometric vision imposed on the Brazilian highlands. These are not accidents of history, they are conscious revivals, the latest chapters in a story that began millennia ago. The principles debated in the Indus Valley and classical Greece, efficiency versus community, symbolism versus spontaneity, are the same forces that shape our urban landscapes and our daily lives. When we walk a straight, numbered street, we are walking in the footsteps of a Minoan merchant in Gurnia or a Roman soldier in a castrum. The ancient grid's DNA is embedded in our own. This inheritance brings with it the same timeless benefits and the same enduring critiques. The orthogonal plan delivers breathtaking efficiency. Emergency services can navigate quickly, postal systems can function with simple logic, and utilities from water mains to fiber optic cables can be laid in predictable, linear pathways. It creates a legible city where anyone can find their way, fostering a sense of transparency and, in theory, equal access. This was the democratic promise Hippodamus saw in Miletus, and it is the practical reality that allows a city of millions to function. Yet, this very clarity has a shadow side. The relentless geometry can feel impersonal, monotonous, even alienating. A grid of identical blocks can erase local character and history. creating what critics call a placelessness, where one intersection feels indistinguishable from another. Furthermore, that same legibility that empowers a citizen also empowers control. The straight line facilitates not just the flow of traffic, but the flow of observation. In a modern context, the grid's open sightlines can enable surveillance, both informal and systematic, echoing the way ancient planners used the geometry to make their populations visible and manageable. The debate is never settled. Is the grid a framework for freedom or a tool for regulation? Perhaps the most profound lesson from these early experiments is that there is no perfect, one-size-fits-all solution. The ancient world showed us a spectrum of approaches. The Minoans used the grid pragmatically in their towns while building labyrinthine palaces for ceremony. The Chinese adapted the ideal square of Wangcheng to the practical needs of a living metropolis like Chang'an. They understood that urban planning is not about imposing a single rigid template, but about applying principles thoughtfully to serve human needs. Our modern challenge is the same. The sterile, repetitive grid of some 20th century developments stands as a warning of what happens when the geometry is applied without soul, prioritizing only speed and cost. Conversely, the thoughtful integration of green spaces, mixed-use zoning, and pedestrian-friendly design within a clear street network shows how the ancient template can be humanized. By studying why the grid appeared and why it sometimes failed, we gain more than historical insight. We gain a mirror for our own choices. Every zoning decision, every new suburb, every revitalized downtown is part of this ancient conversation about how we wish to live together. The quest that began with surveyors stretching ropes under the Bronze Age sun continues in city council chambers and architectural studios today. It is the enduring human project of drawing order from chaos, of trying to build a better world, one straight line at a time. We can reconstruct the tools and measure the streets, but the minds behind the world's first planned cities remain tantalizingly out of reach. This is where archaeology meets its limits and where the most compelling mysteries begin. For all our discoveries, the intimate details of how these ancient planners worked are shrouded in silence, leaving us with a series of haunting, unanswered questions that drive research to this day. Take the Immaculate Order of Mohenjo-daro. We see the finished product, a masterpiece of geometric precision. But what did the planning session look like? Who was in the room? Was it a council of elders, a single visionary priest-architect, or a guild of surveyors? Did they use maps drawn on clay tablets or parchment, or was the entire grand design held in memory and communicated through oral tradition and a set of sacred rituals? We have found no master blueprint, no architectural drawing for the city. The plan itself is the only document we have. This absence forces us to wonder, was their process so deeply ingrained, so systematic, that they needed no physical map, operating instead from a shared cultural template so powerful it could be replicated across an entire civilization without deviation? The question is not trivial. It asks us to imagine a form of knowledge transmission so efficient and so complete that it left no paper trail, only perfect cities. Then there is the enigma of Teotihuacan. The alignment of the Avenue of the Dead with celestial events is undeniable. But how did they achieve such accuracy over a distance of miles? Did they use a series of observation posts on distant mountains to sight the stars and then translate those sight lines onto the valley floor? Was there a single, colossal master plan conceived before the first foundation stone was laid, a vision so grand it took centuries to fulfill? Or did the city grow in phases, with each new layer of construction carefully aligned to the original sacred axis, a tradition maintained over hundreds of years? The sheer scale of the coordination suggests a central authority with an unwavering long-term vision, yet we do not know the name of a single ruler or head planner from the city's zenith. Their identity is erased while their geometric legacy stands in stone. These site-specific puzzles point to a larger, almost philosophical mystery that lingers in the background of all this research. Is the independent emergence of the grid on different continents a stunning example of convergent human thought, or could it hint at a lost common source? The idea of a single, primordial civilization that spread advanced knowledge before disappearing into myth is a seductive one, a narrative woven into countless legends. Mainstream archaeology finds no evidence for such a global connection, emphasizing that isolated cultures can and do arrive at similar solutions when faced with similar problems of scale and social complexity. Yet, the specificity of the solution, the orthogonal grid with integrated infrastructure and cosmic alignment, is so elegant and so consistent that it naturally sparks wonder. Could there have been faint, now vanished threads of contact, ideas traveling along uncharted trade routes or with migrating peoples, being adapted and reinvented in each new land? Or does the grid reveal something fundamental about the human brain's preference for order when creating complex systems? This is the beautiful tension at the heart of the discipline. We build our understanding piece by piece, but we must always leave room for the unknown. Current research is now asking questions earlier generations could not. Using advanced technologies like ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery, archaeologists are looking beneath the streets of these ancient cities, searching for the very first lines, the foundational markings that started it all. They are analyzing soil samples and construction sequences to understand the order of operations, trying to determine if the grid was laid out all at once or grew module by module. Each tiny find, a peculiar tool, an unexpected layer of gravel under a foundation, has the potential to rewrite a paragraph in this story. This is why history is never a closed book. It is a living, breathing investigation. Every new dig site, every reinterpretation of old data can overturn a long-held assumption. The story of the urban grid is still being written, with each unanswered question serving as a beacon for the next generation of explorers. So what do you think when you look at the map of an ancient planned city? What theory feels most compelling to you? Do you see the hand of common, forgotten teachers, or the brilliant, separate spark of human ingenuity firing again and again across the ages? The mystery is yours to ponder because the conversation between the past and the present is far from over. The sheer perfection of these ancient plans can feel almost supernatural. It is a short, seductive step from wonder to speculation, from asking how they did it to suggesting they could not have done it alone. This is the territory where rigorous history meets popular myth, where the undeniable genius of early human societies gets explained away by visitors from the stars or the citizens of a sunken continent. The idea is compelling, a narrative shortcut that solves the mystery with a single, spectacular answer. But this answer, whether framed as ancient astronauts or a lost super-civilization like Atlantis, does more than entertain. It quietly steals one of humanity's greatest triumphs. To attribute the grid of Mohenjo-daro or the alignment of Teotihuacan to extraterrestrial blueprints is to say that our ancestors were not capable of such vision, that human creativity and collaboration are insufficient to explain our own past. It is a disservice to the countless generations of engineers, laborers, and visionaries whose bones are buried in the very soil of those cities. The truth, supported by over a century of meticulous archaeology, is far more inspiring because it is authentically human. We do not need to look to the stars for an architect. The evidence for gradual, indigenous development is written in the layers of the earth itself. Take Teotihuacan. Excavations reveal it was not built in a single, miraculous moment. The city began as a small village around 400 years before the Common Era. Over centuries, it grew in phases, with older structures carefully buried and incorporated into newer, grander platforms. The famous celestial alignment was likely established early, but the monumental pyramids we see today are the result of multiple expansions, each generation building upon the sacred geometry of the last. This is not the work of outsiders delivering a finished plan. It is the work of a living culture refining its own tradition, generation by generation. Similarly, in the Indus Valley, we see a clear progression. Before the great cities, there were smaller, planned towns like Meyagar, showing the gradual development of mud brick architecture, grain storage, and craft specialization over thousands of years. The standardized brick and the grid did not appear out of nowhere. They evolved from long experimentation with materials and community organization. The archaeological record is a slow-motion film of innovation, not a snapshot of a gift from the gods. The environmental adaptations are also deeply local, not imported. The intricate drainage of Mohenjo-daro is a direct response to the Indus River's seasonal floods. The orientation of Chinese capitals is rooted in a uniquely Chinese cosmology of heaven and earth. The terraced grids of Minoan towns fit the specific contours of Cretan hillsides. These solutions are born from intimate, prolonged interaction with a specific place, not from a universal alien handbook. What the fringe theories ultimately miss is the profound power of human social collaboration. Building a gridded city was not just an engineering project, it was a social contract. It required a shared belief system, a common purpose strong enough to coordinate the labor of thousands over decades. The real miracle is not the geometry, but the human ability to communicate a vision so compelling that it could organize an entire society around a single, monumental task. This capacity for collective imagination and coordinated effort is the true hallmark of our species. To outsource that achievement to aliens is to overlook our own defining strength. The story of the early grids is not a mystery that requires supernatural intervention. It is a testament to the extraordinary potential of ordinary humans working together across generations. It shows us that when faced with the challenges of flood, famine, or simply living together in vast numbers, our ancestors responded with observation, experimentation, and breathtaking creativity. That is a legacy worth claiming in full, a story not of borrowed technology, but of homegrown genius written in the straight lines of our first cities. Standing before the ruins of an ancient gridded city is to hold a conversation with time itself. For those inspired to trace these lines in the stone, to walk the same streets laid out millennia ago, the journey offers a profound connection no textbook can provide. Let us be your virtual guide to a few of these accessible wonders, transforming a simple visit into an active exploration of the planner's mind. First, consider the sprawling, sun-baked plains of Mohenjo-daro in modern-day Pakistan. As you enter the excavated lower town, resist the urge to simply see a collection of walls. Instead, look for the pattern. Find a high point and observe how the wide main avenues run straight as arrows, north-south and east-west, dividing the city into those uniform, rectangular blocks. Then get down to street level. Search carefully along the edges of the lanes for the covered drainage channels, the brick-lined gullies that were the city's lifeline. Notice the standard-sized bricks everywhere, a tangible feel of that mass production in your hand. Your goal here is not just to see a ruin, but to see the system, to spot the repeating module that made this immense community function. It is a hauntingly silent place, but if you listen with your eyes, the geometry speaks volumes. Crossing the globe, the Valley of Mexico holds Teotihuacan, a site of overwhelming scale. Your guide here is the colossal Avenue of the Dead. Do not just walk down it, feel its alignment. Stand at the midpoint and look toward the Pyramid of the Moon, then turn to see the distant silhouette of the Cerro Gordo mountain, which the avenue precisely frames. This is not a random path, it is a deliberate sightline anchoring the city to the sacred landscape. As you explore the grid of residential compounds surrounding the avenue, look at their standardized square layouts, imagining each as a single cell in the city's vast, organized body. The awe comes from the sheer ambition of the plan, a design so grand it bends the valley to its will. For a more intimate encounter, travel to the coast of Crete and the Minoan town of Gurnia. Here, the grid adapts to human terrain. Climb the stone-stepped alleyways that branch at right angles from the main street, feeling how this terraced plan made a hillside community navigable and cohesive. Peer into the small workshops that line these lanes, where the grid facilitated not imperial ceremony, but daily craft and trade. It is a reminder that ancient planning could be pragmatic and community-focused, built for the rhythm of local life rather than the proclamation of absolute power. To visit these sites is to become a detective of space. Your task is to find the evidence of intention. Look for the sudden, straight line in a world of nature's curves. Seek out the consistent width of a street, the repetition of a building unit, the careful grading of a slope for drainage. Each of these details is a clue left by the planners, a direct message across the centuries about their priorities, their skills, and their vision for a harmonious society. When you stand at the center of such a place, you are standing at the intersection of their world and yours, connected by the universal language of the straight line and the right angle. It is an experience that transforms abstract history into a personal encounter, leaving you with a simple, powerful question: what order will we choose to inscribe upon the earth for those who come after us? The silent geometry of those ancient streets speaks directly to our most urgent modern challenges. We stand at a crossroads of climate uncertainty and relentless urban expansion, where our cities often feel like the problem rather than the solution. Yet the blueprint for a different way forward was drawn thousands of years ago. These early grids were not just monuments to power, they were sophisticated experiments in living sustainably on a grand scale, and their core principles offer a forgotten handbook for building resilient futures. The first lesson is their masterful, non-negotiable integration with natural systems, especially water. At Mohenjo-daro, the drainage network was not added later. It was the circulatory system designed alongside the streets. This is a radical contrast to many modern developments, where water management is an afterthought, leading to catastrophic flooding or polluted runoff. The ancient approach teaches us to see a city not as separate from its watershed, but as an active participant within it, designing with the flow of water from the very first sketch, using green spaces for natural absorption, and channeling rainwater as a resource rather than a waste product, is a principle we are only now painfully relearning. Their foresight turns a modern engineering challenge into a question of foundational design philosophy. Efficiency of space is another profound inheritance. The ancient grid, with its uniform blocks and clear hierarchy of streets, maximizes usable area while minimizing wasted land. It creates a dense, walkable fabric where daily needs are within reach, reducing reliance on long-distance travel. Consider the Minoan town of Gurnia, where homes, workshops, and communal spaces were woven together on a hillside, creating a self-contained neighborhood where life, work, and community intersected on a human scale. This is the antithesis of the single-use zoning and car-dependent sprawl that defines so many contemporary cities, a model that consumes land and energy at an unsustainable rate. The ancient grid argues for compact, multi-purpose neighborhoods that foster local identity, reduce transportation emissions, and preserve the surrounding natural landscape. It proves that order and density can coexist with community and convenience, a vital template as we seek to house growing populations without endlessly paving over the earth. Perhaps the most vital lesson is about creating harmony, not just efficiency. These cities were designed with a deep, often sacred, understanding of their place in the world. The alignments at Teotihuacan with mountain peaks and solar cycles were a physical expression of this harmony, embedding the city within a larger environmental and cosmic order. While our drivers may be secular, the principle remains: A sustainable city cannot be a fortress against nature, it must be a partner. This means orienting buildings to harness sunlight and wind, preserving corridors for wildlife, and using local materials. It means designing for the human spirit with shared public spaces like the Greek agora that foster connection and a sense of collective responsibility. The ancient grids show that the most resilient cities are those where people feel a sense of belonging and investment, where the design itself encourages care for the community and its environment. They achieved this not with advanced technology, but with intelligent, context-sensitive planning that viewed the city as a living ecosystem. In our rush toward smart cities filled with sensors and data, we risk forgetting this older, deeper wisdom. The most sustainable technology may not be a new gadget, but an old idea thoughtfully reapplied. Looking back to these early examples is not an exercise in nostalgia, it is an act of recovery. It is about reclaiming a holistic vision of urban life where order supports ecology, where density enables community, and where design is in conversation with the land, the water, and the sky. The past does not hold all the answers for our complex modern world, but it holds fundamental questions we have stopped asking. What if our cities were designed first for resilience and belonging? What if every straight line also served a river, a breeze, or a neighbor's path? The ancient planners, in their silent stone testament, suggest that the most forward-thinking blueprint might already be here, waiting in the foundations of our very first cities. The straight line is a whisper from our own minds. After tracing the global history of the grid, from its practical origins to its spiritual heights, we are left with a final, introspective layer. Why does this particular pattern feel so instinctively right to us, across every divide of culture and epoch? The answer may lie not in the soil or the stars, but within the very architecture of human thought. Psychologists note a fundamental preference in our brains for predictable, legible environments. A space we can easily navigate and understand reduces cognitive load, it lowers anxiety and frees mental energy for other tasks. The grid offers the ultimate in cognitive ease. Its repeating, orthogonal pattern creates a mental map that is simple to internalize. You always know roughly where you are and how to get somewhere else. This isn't just about convenience, it's about a primal sense of security. In a world filled with unpredictable natural forces and social complexities, the grid provides a framework of certainty. It is a sanctuary of the mind built from stone and street. This psychological pull is mirrored by a profound philosophical impulse. For millennia, thinkers have grappled with the relationship between human rationality and the untamed natural world. The act of imposing a geometric grid upon a landscape is one of the most concrete expressions of this struggle. It represents the human will to carve out a domain of logic, to assert that here, in this place, our reason shapes the world. The philosopher might see in the grid a declaration of human agency, a physical argument that we are not merely passive subjects of nature's chaos, but active participants who can impose our own order. This drive connects the planner of Mohenjo-daro to the gardener trimming a hedge into a perfect square, or the farmer planting crops in neat, parallel rows. It is the same impulse scaled to the size of a civilization. The grid, then, becomes more than an urban design. It is a meditation on the human condition itself. We are creatures who perceive patterns, who crave meaning, and who are uniquely burdened with the knowledge of life's inherent unpredictability. Building a grid is an act of meaning-making. It is a way to answer the silent anxiety of chaos by creating a tangible, walkable argument for order. Every right-angled corner is a small victory against entropy, a statement that here things make sense. This perspective allows us to see these ancient cities not as cold, mechanical places, but as profound expressions of hope and resilience. They were collective attempts to build a world that mirrored the deepest needs of the human psyche for safety, for understanding, and for a sign that our efforts leave a lasting mark. The enduring legacy of the grid from the Bronze Age to the modern metropolis suggests this is not a passing preference, but a core part of who we are. In the end, the story of these early urban plans is not just a chapter in architectural history. It is the story of humanity drawing its first bold lines in the sand, trying to build a home not just for the body, but for the searching, ordering human spirit. Our journey reveals a profound and humbling truth. The city grid, that symbol of modern rationality, is not a singular invention to be claimed by any one culture, but a recurring discovery in the human story. From the silent, brick-lined streets of Mohenjo-daro to the celestial avenue of Teotihuacan, from the pragmatic terraces of Minoan towns to the cosmic diagrams of ancient China, we find the same elegant solution emerging again and again. This was not a linear march of progress from Greece to Rome to us. It was a chorus of innovation, sung in different languages across separate continents, reaching harmonies of sophistication that still leave us in awe. These early grids were far more than street plans. They were economic engines designed to streamline trade and taxation. They were social blueprints enforcing hierarchy or, in rare cases, fostering civic equality. They were cosmic maps aligning human communities with the cycles of the sun and stars. And above all, they were bold statements of power, written in geometry across the landscape, declaring that here human order reigns. Their appearance in the deep past, fully formed and brilliantly executed, challenges the very core of how we often view history. We tend to imagine a steady, upward climb from simple to complex. But the evidence whispers a different narrative, one of peaks and valleys, of brilliant flashes of understanding that can arise, fade, and be rediscovered. These are the marvels that arrived, in a sense, too early, not fitting neatly into our timelines, forcing us to redraw the map of human achievement. They remind us that genius is not the property of any single era or people, but a potential that has flickered to life wherever humans have gathered to build something lasting together. If this re-examination of our shared past has shifted your perspective, consider subscribing for more journeys into the mysteries that reshape our understanding. And we would love to hear your thoughts below. Which of these ancient grid civilizations, with its unique answer to the challenge of urban life, fascinates you the most? The silent, egalitarian order of the Indus Valley, the sacred geometry of Teotihuacan, or the philosophical blueprint of ancient China? The story of our cities, it turns out, is far older, richer, and more wonderfully interconnected than we ever imagined.